Your pocket holds a piece of propaganda minted by a Roman emperor. The object you used to unlock your door was once a sacred key to the underworld. We are surrounded by the ancient past, yet we see only the present. This is a journey into the hidden layers of the ordinary. By the end, you will never look at the everyday items in your home the same way again. We will uncover why a simple comb was buried with Viking warriors, and how a common drinking glass contains a 2,000-year-old feat of nanotechnology. What forgotten story is waiting for you in the things you touch every single day? That jingle in your pocket is a sound that has echoed for millennia. A simple coin passed from hand to hand without a second thought is one of humanity's most profound inventions. It is not just money, it is a portable piece of power, a tiny metal canvas for a ruler's most urgent message. Before newspapers, before radio, before any form of mass media, the coin was the broadcast. Every time you spent one, you were spreading an idea. In ancient Greece, a silver drachma might bear the image of Athena, her owl staring solemnly from the metal. This was not merely a pretty design, it was a declaration. It said, this wealth, this trade, this very idea of civilization is protected by the goddess of wisdom and war. It tied the economy directly to the divine, making every transaction a small act of faith. Then came Rome, who mastered this art of metallic propaganda. Roman emperors understood that most citizens would never see their face in person, but they would see it every market day, stamped on a denarius. That coin was a promise and a threat. It carried the emperor's stern profile, his chosen title like Pius or Invictus, meaning pious or unconquered. Even as the coin traveled to the farthest frontier, it whispered the same message. I am here, my authority reaches you, even here. Some coins told more specific stories. A new issue might commemorate a great military victory, showing captured enemies or a triumphal arch. Others celebrated engineering marvels like a new aqueduct or harbor. They were the social media feeds of the ancient world, broadcasting the empire's greatest hits directly into the palms of its people. But the story is etched into the coin's very creation. The minting process was a closely guarded secret, a blend of sacred ritual and cutting-edge technology. Skilled engravers would carve the intricate designs in reverse onto hardened steel dies. These dies were then struck with tremendous force onto a blank metal disc, a blank. The sound of that strike was the sound of history being made permanent. If the blank was too cold, it would crack. If the strike was misaligned, the image would be blurry. Every perfect coin was a tiny victory of art over physics, and sometimes the coins themselves became lost chapters. A hoard of coins discovered in a field might be the only record of a short-lived emperor, his name preserved nowhere else. A single coin from a distant land found in the ruins of a port city can rewrite trade routes, proving connections historians never dreamed existed. So the next time you feel the weight of a coin in your hand, pause for a moment. You are not just holding currency, you are holding a sovereign's ambition, an engraver's skill, and a message that has traveled across centuries to reach you. It is a tiny metal time machine, and it is just the first object in your home with a secret to tell. That power to broadcast identity reached its most artistic form in the city of Syracuse. On the island of Sicily, a master engraver named Cimon created what many consider the single most beautiful coin of the ancient world, the Syracuse decadrachm. On one side, the water nymph Arethusa is portrayed with such delicate, lifelike detail that you can see the individual strands of her hair being gently caressed by the water. Dolphins leap around her serene face. This was not just a unit of currency, it was a statement of civic pride and cultural sophistication. A tiny, portable sculpture declaring Syracuse a center of art and maritime power. But coins could also speak a more mysterious, symbolic language. Far to the north, Celtic tribes produced coins that were wildly different from the realistic portraits of Rome or Greece. Their gold staters were often covered in swirling, abstract patterns, horses that dissolved into sun symbols, and faces that were more spirit than person. To our modern eyes, they look almost like modern art. Scholars believe these were not failed attempts at realism, but deliberate codes. Every curve and symbol may have encoded tribal identity, stories of gods, or maps of the cosmos, turning each coin into a sacred object, a piece of wearable mythology for a people who left no written records. This idea of a coin holding profound, almost spiritual weight brings us to a single, infamous silver piece, the 30 pieces of silver. While no specific coin survives that we can point to, the denarius of the Roman Empire is the almost certain candidate. That specific type of coin, bearing the image of the Emperor Tiberius, became forever linked to the story of Judas Iscariot. A simple, functional object of trade was transformed by narrative into the ultimate symbol of betrayal, its metallic clink echoing through 2,000 years of art and literature. Yet the story coins tell is not always about empires or myths. Sometimes it is about the very roots of daily life. In ancient China during the Zhou dynasty, money did not look like money at all. They used knife money and spade money, bronze objects cast in the unmistakable shapes of blades and digging tools. You could not comfortably carry these in a pocket. They were heavy and awkward. But that was precisely the point. They were not abstract tokens of value. They were stylized versions of the actual tools that created wealth through farming and craftsmanship. To hold a spade coin was to literally hold the symbol of the labor that fed and built the community, a direct link between the economy and the earth itself. So from the artistic triumph of Syracuse to the abstract codes of the Celts, from a coin of betrayal to a currency shaped like a tool, these metal discs were never just cash. They were the concentrated essence of a culture's soul, its fears, its pride, and its daily reality, pressed into a form that could fit in your palm. And if that is true for the coins in our drawers, what profound stories are woven into the very fabric we wear? But that symbol of control and access in your pocket has a far more ancient and mystical twin hanging on your keychain. The modern metal key is a direct descendant of objects that were once considered sacred, tools not for locking out thieves but for guarding the very gates between worlds. Its story begins not with convenience but with profound exclusivity. In ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, the first keys were nothing like our sleek slivers of metal. They were massive, cumbersome objects, often made of wood and as large as a person's forearm. You did not casually slip one into your pocket. These were devices for the doors of temples, royal treasuries, and palaces. To possess such a key was to hold a monumental responsibility. It meant you had the authority to access spaces that contained not just gold, but divine statues, sacred texts, and the secrets of the state. The key was a physical symbol of trust from the gods or the king, a marker that you were a guardian of the threshold between the profane world and the realm of power and mystery. The Romans, ever the practical engineers, transformed this sacred object into a more personal symbol. They crafted intricate metal keys, some so small and ornate they were worn as rings on the fingers of wealthy matrons. This was a powerful social signal. The lady of the house literally held the means to every locked chest and storeroom, controlling the family's wealth, its wine, its documents. That ring key was a badge of domestic authority, a constant, visible reminder of who managed the realm within the home's walls. But the deeper magic of the key is etched into our oldest myths. In Roman belief, the god Janus, the two-faced deity of beginnings, doorways, and transitions, was often depicted holding a key. He was the guardian of gates, both literal and metaphorical, presiding over the passage from one year to the next, from peace to war, from outside to inside. To invoke Janus was to acknowledge that every time you passed through a doorway, you were crossing a boundary, and the key was the instrument that controlled that sacred passage. Even more potently, the Greek goddess Hecate, ruler of magic, ghosts, and crossroads, was also a keyholder. She was believed to hold the keys to the underworld, capable of unlocking the gates between the land of the living and the realm of the dead. Her key was not about security, but about forbidden knowledge and spiritual travel. This imbues the simple act of turning a key with an ancient subconscious ritual. When you insert your key and feel the mechanism click, you are performing a modern echo of a priest unlocking a temple sanctum, or a mystic symbolically opening a path to another plane of existence. You are not just disengaging a deadbolt, you are crossing a threshold you have declared safe. You are asserting control over a defined private world. So the next time you come home, pause with your hand on the lock. You are not just holding a piece of cut metal. You are holding an ancient emblem of authority, a descendant of the tools that guarded the gods' treasures, and a silent participant in a ritual as old as the first door that was ever closed. It protects more than your possessions. It safeguards your own personal sanctuary, a concept our ancestors would have understood in the most profound spiritual terms. And if the objects we use to define our private spaces hold such history, what ancient stories are woven into the very tools we use to present ourselves to the world? That key controls your passage from the outside world into a private sanctuary, a space where you prepare to face others. And the very first tool you might reach for in that private ritual of preparation has a history that is equally intimate and profound. The humble comb is an artifact of pure social archaeology. For thousands of years, crafted from bone, ivory, or wood, it has been a constant companion in the most human of acts, grooming. But to see it as merely a utilitarian object is to miss its deeper language. In the hands of our ancestors, a comb was a portable canvas, a statement of identity, and a key to a different kind of afterlife. When archaeologists excavate a Viking grave and find a comb resting beside the skeleton, they are uncovering a chapter of a life. This was not a casual inclusion. Norse combs, often made from deer antler, were frequently carved with astonishing detail. Some bear intricate interlacing patterns, while others tell stories, depicting scenes from legendary sagas like the tale of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer. To own such a comb was to carry a piece of the mythic world with you, to literally weave those stories into your hair each day. It declared your connection to the culture's heroes and gods, transforming a daily chore into an act of remembrance and identity. But combs speak a quieter, more visceral language as well. The discovery of fine-toothed lice combs at sites from ancient Egypt to medieval Europe tells a stark, unvarnished story of daily life. These small, double-sided implements with their tightly spaced teeth are relics of a universal and persistent struggle. They are reminders that regardless of status, everyone shared certain common, gritty realities. The presence of a delousing comb in a wealthy Roman villa or a Viking longhouse speaks to a world without modern remedies, where personal care was a hands-on, meticulous battle. This mundane object connects us directly to the physical experience of people separated from us by centuries. And then there is the comb's final, solemn duty. In cultures across the globe, from the Egyptians to the Romans, combs were essential burial goods. They were placed in tombs and graves with a clear and poignant purpose to ensure the deceased could be properly groomed for the journey into the afterlife. The belief was that you needed to present yourself with dignity and order before the gods or in the realm of the dead. A simple bone comb, therefore, became a vessel of love and respect, a final gift from the living to equip their loved one for eternity. This practice turns the comb from a tool of vanity into an object of profound spiritual care. Even its evolving design charts the course of human fashion. The shift from wide-toothed combs used for detangling and managing thicker, perhaps braided or wilder hairstyles, to the fine-toothed combs needed for sleek, elaborate Roman coiffures or powdered wigs of the 18th century, is a direct reflection of changing aesthetics. Each comb is a fossilized snapshot of what beauty meant in that time and place. So the next time you pick up a plastic comb, consider its lineage. You are holding the descendant of an object that carried myths into battle, fought a constant, tiny war of hygiene, and was entrusted with the solemn duty of preparing a soul for eternity. It is not just for untangling hair, it is for untangling the very fabric of daily life from the distant past. That simple act of grooming, of preparing oneself for the world, often leads to another ritual, the sharing of a drink. And the very vessel you raise to your lips holds a secret history of fire, magic, and a revolution so profound it changed the very texture of civilization. The story of glass begins not with clarity but with mystery and mimicry. In the workshops of ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, around 1,500 years before the Common Era, the first glass vessels were not transparent windows or simple cups. They were treasures. Artisans would painstakingly form them around a clay core, building up layers of molten glass that, when cooled, revealed deep, opulent hues of cobalt blue and turquoise. This was no accident. They were deliberately crafted to imitate the most prized materials of the ancient world, lapis lazuli and turquoise stone. A glass cup was not just a container, it was a piece of alchemical deception, a triumph of human craft over nature's rarity. It was luxury solidified from sand and fire. For centuries, this slow, difficult process kept glass in the hands of priests and pharaohs. Then, in the 1st century before the Common Era, somewhere in the Roman Empire, a revolutionary discovery was made. The invention of glassblowing. Imagine the moment a craftsperson realized they could gather a molten blob of glass on the end of a hollow iron pipe and with a gentle breath inflate it like a bubble. This was not an incremental improvement, it was a quantum leap. Suddenly, a single artisan could create in minutes what once took days. The cost plummeted. Glassware escaped the temples and palaces and began to appear in the market stalls and homes of ordinary citizens. For the first time in history, people could see what they were drinking. They could admire the color of their wine, check its clarity. The world itself looked different through a transparent window. This democratization of a miracle material led to artistic heights that seemed to defy their own time. Consider the Lycurgus cup, a Roman cage cup from the 4th century. At first glance, it is a stunning green, but hold it up to the light and it transforms into a glowing, translucent red. For over 1,600 years, this magic was a complete mystery. We now know the answer is nanotechnology. Roman artisans, through a process of trial and error we can only marvel at, infused the glass with tiny particles of gold and silver, each one smaller than a grain of sand. These particles scatter light in such a way that the color changes depending on whether the light is shining through it or reflecting off it. They were manipulating matter at a scale invisible to the eye, achieving an effect we can only explain with modern physics. This was not just craft, it was high science disguised as sorcery. And like all powerful knowledge, the recipes for such wonders were closely guarded secrets, passed from master to apprentice like the words of a sacred spell. The colors themselves were a language. In the glittering mosaics of Byzantine churches, glass tesserae were not chosen at random. Deep red glass symbolized the blood of martyrs and the passion of Christ. Gold glass, made by sandwiching a thin layer of gold leaf between 2 layers of clear glass, represented the unapproachable light of divinity itself. To worship in such a space was to be surrounded by a theology written in colored light and fire. So every time you take a sip from a simple drinking glass, you are connected to that ancient lineage. You are touching an object born from the desire to turn common sand into a jewel, revolutionized by a breath of human ingenuity and perfected by artisans who played with light itself. It is a vessel of civilization, proof that even the most transparent of objects can hold the deepest, most colorful histories. And if the clear glass in your cupboard contains such hidden fire, what ancient engineering marvels are embedded in the opaque, sturdy walls of your home? That clear glass in your hand is a marvel of transformed earth, but the object that holds your shirt closed is a story of social revolution in miniature. The button, a small disc with holes or a shank, seems like the very definition of a simple fastener, a solution to the problem of keeping your clothes on. But its true history is a winding tale of art, absurd wealth, and silent codes. For thousands of years, the button was not a fastener at all. In the ancient cities of the Indus Valley civilization, around 2,800 years before the Common Era, archaeologists have found beautiful, ornate buttons made of shell. They were drilled with holes, but not for threading through fabric. They were decorative studs sewn onto garments as pure ornamentation, little flashes of personal style. The functional buttonhole, that ingenious slit that allows a button to pass through and grip, would not become common in Europe for another 4,000 years. When it finally arrived in the 13th century, it sparked a fashion frenzy that bordered on mania. Buttons suddenly became the ultimate status symbol. In the courts of France and England, nobility competed not just with the quality of their buttons, but with the sheer, overwhelming quantity of them. A single sleeve might be studded with dozens from wrist to elbow. A coat could boast hundreds, each one a tiny declaration of wealth. They were crafted from the most luxurious materials imaginable: silver and gold, polished jet, mother of pearl, and even precious gemstones. The cost was staggering. This excess became so pronounced that government stepped in with sumptuary laws, explicit rules designed to curb such displays. These laws dictated who could wear how many buttons and of what material based on their social rank. A merchant, no matter how wealthy, could be fined for wearing the same number of silver buttons as a duke. The button, therefore, became a battlefield where personal vanity fought against social order, but this silent language extended far beyond mere wealth. In the rigid hierarchies of the military, the placement, size, and number of buttons on a uniform conveyed instant information. The spacing on a cuff or the double row on a coat could tell you a soldier's regiment, his rank, and his years of service at a glance. In the guilds of medieval Europe, the buttons on a craftsman's tunic might signify his specific trade and his level of mastery. They were wearable credentials, a non-verbal system of identification long before photo badges or business cards. Even the humble shirt button on a man's cuff today carries a faint echo of this history. The story goes that Napoleon Bonaparte, frustrated by his soldiers wiping their noses on their uniform sleeves, ordered buttons sewn on the cuffs to make the habit less comfortable. Whether true or not, the tale highlights how this tiny object was used to enforce discipline and dictate behavior. So the next time you fasten your coat against the cold, look at that row of plastic or horn discs. You are not just closing a garment, you are engaging with an ancient symbol of ornament, a relic of past extravagance that once required laws to control it, and a silent code that once declared who a person was in the eyes of the world. It is a small, round chapter in the history of human identity, and if the buttons on our clothes can whisper such complex tales, what profound stories are locked within the very structure of the buildings we inhabit? Those walls that shelter you are built upon a foundation of ancient ingenuity. The simple brick, a rectangle of baked clay, is one of humanity's oldest and most transformative technologies. Its invention marks the moment we stopped simply taking shelter from the world and began to systematically reshape it. The story begins in the cradle of civilization, along the fertile floodplains of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The ancient Mesopotamians had an abundance of mud and straw and a pressing need for durable, permanent structures. They discovered that by forming this mud into uniform blocks and drying them in the scorching sun, they could create building units that were strong, plentiful, and modular. These were the first sun-dried bricks. With them, they built the great ziggurate stepped temples that reached toward the heavens, literally constructing mountains of faith from the earth beneath their feet. But sun-dried bricks had a fatal flaw: water. A heavy rain could melt a wall back into the mud from which it came. the revolutionary leap came with the discovery of firing. By baking these clay bricks in a kiln, a process perfected by the Romans, they became virtually indestructible. The heat transformed the soft clay into a ceramic, a literal piece of artificial stone. This was a power previously reserved for nature, now harnessed by human hands. The Roman legions carried this technology across Europe, building forts, aqueducts, and roads with a speed and uniformity that was the backbone of their empire. Every Roman brick was often stamped with the mark of its maker or the reigning emperor, turning each one into a tiny, permanent record of its origin, a barcode from antiquity. But the brick's true magic is in its geometry. That humble rectangular shape is a masterpiece of structural engineering. Laid in alternating patterns like the classic stretcher bond, bricks interlock to distribute weight and stress evenly, creating walls that can bear immense loads. The mortar between them is not just glue, it is a calculated gap that allows for slight movement, for expansion and contraction with the seasons, preventing the entire structure from cracking apart. This combination of a strong unit and a flexible joint is a principle that has supported cities for millennia, and like all ancient objects, bricks absorb the spirit of their creators. In the soaring Gothic cathedrals of medieval Europe, bricks were not just building blocks, they were prayers in clay. Laid by masons who saw their work as a divine service, each brick was part of a collective effort to create a vessel for the sacred, to build a space that would inspire awe for generations. In the American colonies, handmade bricks bore the fingerprints of their makers pressed into the wet clay, a personal signature forever embedded in the hearts and foundations of new homes. So the next time you pass a brick building, run your hand over its textured surface. You are touching the solidified ambition of Mesopotamia, the organizational genius of Rome, and the patient faith of countless anonymous builders. That wall is not just a barrier, it is a library of human progress written in fired earth and mortar. And if the very walls around us hold such layered history, what profound secrets are held in the objects we use to see our own reflection? That wall of baked clay shelters a space where we perform our most private rituals, including the simple act of mending a tear. The tool we use for that repair is a silent witness to the very fabric of civilization. The sewing needle is one of humanity's oldest and most transformative inventions, a slender sliver of technology that stitched societies together. Its origin is astonishingly ancient. Over 60,000 years ago, our prehistoric ancestors were not just surviving, they were innovating with elegance. Using stone tools to carefully shape slivers of bone, ivory, or even bird talons, they crafted the first needles, complete with a meticulously carved eye. This was not a casual improvement, it was a revolution in survival. Before the needle, clothing was likely simple draped hides or furs. With a needle and thread made from sinew or plant fibers, humans could sew fitted, layered garments. They could create parkas with hoods, trousers, and waterproof boots. This technological leap was the key that unlocked the planet. It allowed our ancestors to migrate out of Africa and into the frigid landscapes of Europe and Asia, literally sewing their way across the globe. The needle did not just protect the body, it soon became an instrument of the soul. In skilled hands, it transformed from a tool of utility into a brush for storytelling. Embroidery became a revered art form, a language of thread and color. The most famous example is the Bayeux tapestry, an immense linen cloth nearly 70 meters long, embroidered in the 11th century. It is not a tapestry in the true sense, but a monumental piece of needlework that chronicles the Norman conquest of England. Every stitch, from the charging horses to the falling soldiers, was placed by a needle wielded with the precision of a historian's pen. This was how history was recorded and displayed, not in ink but in wool, making the needle a tool of narrative power. Yet this same tool could also channel darker, more anxious impulses. In ancient Greece, people often turned to magic to seek justice or revenge. They would inscribe curses on thin sheets of lead, calling upon the gods to afflict a rival. But sometimes words were not enough. To make the curse more potent, they would physically pierce the lead tablet with a bronze needle. The act of driving the needle through the inscribed name was believed to symbolically pin the curse to the victim, to bind the magic to them as irrevocably as a stitch binds fabric. In that moment, the humble needle transformed from a creator into a weapon of supernatural intent. So the next time you thread a needle to mend a button, consider the lineage in your hand. You are holding an object that helped humanity conquer continents, that recorded epic histories in colorful thread, and that was once believed to carry prayers and curses directly into the unseen world. It is a profound paradox, a delicate instrument of both immense creativity and deep-seated human fear, connecting us to the very first stitches that held our world together. The needle that mends fabric connects us to survival, but the dice we roll for fun connect us to fate itself. Those small cubes in your board game box are not modern inventions. They are the direct descendants of one of humanity's oldest tools for confronting uncertainty, the astragalus. This is the ankle bone of a sheep or goat, a naturally blocky, four-sided object that, when tossed, lands in one of four stable positions. For thousands of years, from the streets of Mesopotamia to the courtyards of ancient Greece, these knucklebones were the original dice. They were used for simple games of chance, but their purpose ran far deeper. They were instruments of divination. A shepherd or a king might cast a set of astragoli, interpreting the pattern of their fall as a message from the gods, a glimpse into the opaque future. The move from the organic, lumpy knucklebone to the precise, geometric cube we know today was a monumental shift in thinking. It represented humanity's desire to impose order on chaos, to create a perfectly balanced object where every outcome was mathematically equal. This transition happened independently in different cultures. Archaeologists have found perfectly formed six-sided dice with pips in the ancient cities of the Indus Valley, carved from materials like ivory and terracotta. The Romans, prolific gamers, mass-produced dice from bone, bronze, and even precious amber. But with the invention of the fair die came its shadow, the loaded die. Roman archaeological sites have yielded dice that are subtly shaved or weighted with lead inserts, clear evidence that the temptation to cheat fate is as old as the gamble itself. This reminds us that the ancient world was not a place of pure reverence. It was populated by people just like us, looking for an edge. Yet the role of the dice was often a solemn affair. In many cultures, they were not for play at all, but for making critical, real-world decisions. The belief was profound that the random fall of the bones could bypass human bias and reveal the direct will of the divine. This practice, called sortition, was used to select political officials in ancient Athens, ensuring leaders were chosen by fate, not faction. It was a way to humble human ambition before the mystery of chance. This sacred link between dice and cosmic order is captured beautifully in Norse mythology. In the poetic Edda, after the gods created the world, they did not rest. They sat together and played a game with golden dice, passing the ages in this divine pastime. Here, dice are not a trivial distraction. They are the companions of gods, a metaphor for the random, playful, yet structured forces that shape the universe itself. So when you shake a pair of dice in your hand, you are holding an object that has been a proxy for destiny, a tool for democracy, and a cheat's best friend for over 5,000 years. You are about to engage in a ritual that once sought to read the mind of the gods. That dice in your hand is a contract with chance, but the ring on your finger is a contract with the world. More than mere jewelry, a ring is a circle of power, a tiny closed loop that has contained immense meaning for thousands of years. Its story begins with magic and protection. In ancient Egypt, the scarab beetle was a sacred symbol of rebirth, as it was believed to push the sun across the sky each day. Craftsmen would carve intricate scarabs from stone or faience and mount them on rings. To wear a scarab ring was to carry a piece of the sun's eternal cycle with you, an amulet that promised protection in this life and safe passage into the next. It was not an accessory, it was a portable piece of divine insurance, but rings quickly became tools for organizing human society. In ancient Rome, the material of your ring broadcast your status with brutal clarity. A senator wore a heavy iron ring, a metal associated with strength and military virtue. Only those of the equestrian class, the wealthy knights, were legally permitted to wear rings of gold. Your hand was your resume, and the metal on your finger dictated your place in the rigid hierarchy of the empire. This function evolved into one of the ring's most practical and powerful forms, the signet ring. These rings bore a unique design carved in reverse and intaglio into a gemstone or metal face. Pressed into warm wax sealing a document, it left a distinctive impression. That mark was more than a signature, it was your personal authority made physical. To break a seal was to violate the person it represented. A king's decrees, a merchant's contracts, a noble's last will and testament, all were authenticated by the press of a ring. Your word was literally set in stone and then stamped in wax. This idea of a ring conferring a kind of transformative power is explored in one of philosophy's oldest stories. In Plato's Republic, he tells the tale of the ring of Gyges. A shepherd finds a magical ring that makes him invisible when he turns its bezel. With this power to act without consequence, Gyges descends into corruption, seducing a queen, murdering a king, and seizing a throne. Plato uses the story to pose a profound question. If you could do anything without being seen, would you remain moral? The ring becomes a metaphor for the very nature of justice, asking whether our goodness is innate or merely a product of social pressure and fear of punishment. It is a stark reminder that the power a symbol holds can reflect both our highest ideals and our deepest temptations. And yet, the most common ring we recognize today harnesses that power for a gentler, more binding purpose. The wedding band, its unbroken circle, is a perfect symbol of eternity with no beginning and no end. This symbolism is ancient, representing the endless cycle of the seasons, the sun, and life itself. To place such a circle on a loved one's finger is to make a promise that aspires to that same timeless quality, a vow of loyalty meant to echo forever. From the protective scarab to the senator's iron, from the authority of a signet to the promise of a band, the ring has always been a circle that contains multitudes. It is a tiny stage where magic, class, power, and love all perform. So the next time you see a ring, remember you are looking at a loop that has held human history within its grasp. That ring binds a promise, but the spoon fulfills a more fundamental one, the promise of nourishment. This simple utensil is far more ancient than the fork or knife, a direct extension of the human hand that has shaped both our bodies and our rituals. For tens of thousands of years, our ancestors used shells, pieces of wood, or even curved animal bones to scoop and sip. This was not just about convenience, it was a revolution in diet. The spoon allowed for the consumption of soups, stews, and gruels, foods that could nourish the very young, the elderly, and the infirm. It literally helped civilization feed itself, making soft, cooked foods accessible to all. By the Middle Ages in Europe, the personal spoon had become a crucial possession. You would often carry your own spoon with you, tucked into a belt or a pouch, much like we carry a phone today. It was a mark of self-sufficiency and personal dignity. To own a spoon, especially one made of precious metal like silver, was a sign of status and security. You were never at the mercy of a host's hospitality. You carried your own means to partake. This personal connection made spoons deeply sentimental objects. In 16th century England, one of the most cherished gifts for a newborn was an apostle spoon. These were exquisite silver spoons whose handles terminated in finely sculpted figures of Jesus' disciples. A wealthy godparent might give a full set of 12, while a modest gift would be a single spoon, often depicting the patron saint of the child. This was not just a feeding tool, it was a spiritual blessing in solid form, a wish for a life guided by faith and protected by saintly figures placed right in the infant's hand. The spoon's symbolic weight extends to the highest levels of power. In the British coronation ceremony, among the crown jewels, there is a strangely beautiful object, the anointing spoon. This small, pear-shaped vessel of gold with an intricate pearl-studded handle dates back to the 12th century. It survived the destruction of other regalia during the English Civil War, hidden and preserved. During the coronation, holy oil is poured from an ampulla into this spoon, and the Archbishop of Canterbury uses it to anoint the new monarch on the hands, breast, and head. In that sacred moment, the spoon is not a utensil, but a conduit for divine grace, physically connecting the sovereign to a 1,000-year-old lineage of kings and queens. But spoons could also dance to a more mischievous tune. Russian folklore tells of the runaway spoon, a magical utensil that would leap from the table and scurry away on its own little legs, leading children on a merry chase. This whimsical tale speaks to the spoon's life of its own in the household, a familiar object with a personality, and in a practice known as cosmonomancy, the spoon took on an oracular role. Practitioners would suspend a sieve or a colander by tying it to a pair of scissors, or sometimes use a single spoon balanced on the edge of a cup. They would then ask a question, and the subsequent rotations or trembles of the suspended object were interpreted as answers from the spirit world. The humble spoon, therefore, could become a pendulum for the unseen, its simple physics transformed into a language of prophecy. From the first shell scooping broth to the coronation spoon anointing a queen, this object has been a quiet companion to our most essential acts, blending the deeply practical with the sacred and the magical in every bowl it touches. That spoon connects us to nourishment, but the object that holds your clothes together connects you to a warrior's pride. The belt buckle is a small canvas for enormous stories, a point where pure necessity collides with profound identity. For the Roman legionary marching across continents, his belt was far more than a strap to hold up his tunic. It was his badge of office, his singulum. This wide leather belt, studded with metal plates and fastened with an often ornate buckle, jingled with every step he took. That sound was the sound of Roman authority on the move. The buckle itself, along with the dangling decorative apron straps, was a mark of his rank and military honor. To lose it was a profound disgrace. It was the very symbol of his duty, the thing that literally girded him for service, transforming a civilian into a soldier with the simple act of fastening. This tradition of the buckle as a masterpiece continued in the shadow of Rome's fall. Among the Celtic and Anglo-Saxon peoples, metalworkers elevated the buckle into a breathtaking art form. The most stunning examples come from places like the Sutton Hoo Ship Burial in England, a royal tomb from the early 7th century. Here, a king was laid to rest with a treasure trove, including an exquisite gold belt buckle. It is not just a fastener, it is a dense, mysterious puzzle cast in precious metal. Its surface is a swirling, intricate menagerie of intertwined serpents and beasts, crafted in what scholars call Seylan style too. This is not random decoration. Every coiled creature, every interlocking pattern, is thought to hold mythological meaning, perhaps telling stories of gods, ancestors, or the complex cosmology of a people who left few written records. To wear such a buckle was to wear a chapter of your people's soul, a portable piece of the mythic world guarding your waist. Centuries later and an ocean away, the buckle found a new kind of power on the American frontier. On the ranch or in the rodeo arena, the belt buckle underwent a dramatic transformation in scale and symbolism. It exploded in size, becoming a gleaming plaque of silver. These were not merely purchased, they were earned. A championship buckle from a rodeo event was a trophy of tangible skill, proof of victory in a contest of strength and grit against man or beast. It told everyone you met at a single glance that you were a champion. For others, custom buckles featured personalized designs, from brands of cattle ranches to scenes of Western life, becoming a bold statement of personal and professional identity. In a land of self-made men, the buckle on your belt was your personal crest, your declaration of who you were and what you could do. So from the disciplined jingle of a Roman soldier's march to the mythic beasts guarding an Anglo-Saxon king, to the earned silver glory of a rodeo champion, the belt buckle has always been about more than holding trousers up. It holds up our stories, our status, and our very sense of self, proving that sometimes the most personal histories are worn right at the center of everything. That belt buckle holds your world together, but the candle once held back the entire night. In a world before the flip of a switch, this humble cylinder of wax and wick was not just a source of light, it was a fragile bubble of civilization against an ocean of darkness. Its flickering flame defined time, guided prayer, and became one of humanity's most powerful symbols. The most common candle for centuries was the tallow candle made from rendered animal fat. It was cheap and accessible, but it sputtered, smoked, and filled homes with a distinct greasy odor. For the wealthy and the divine, however, only one substance would do: beeswax. Beeswax candles burned with a clear, bright, and almost smokeless flame, and they gave off a faint, sweet scent. In the medieval Christian church, this purity was loaded with theological meaning. The clean, burning beeswax was said to symbolize the pure flesh of Christ, incarnate without sin, while the wick represented his human soul and the flame his divine nature. To light such a candle was not just to push back shadows, it was to make a physical prayer, the very act of illumination becoming an act of faith. The Romans, ever practical, put candles to work as the world's first portable clocks. They developed candle clocks where measured candles of consistent thickness were marked with notches. As the wax burned down past each notch, a known amount of time had passed. A 4-hour candle might be notched into quarters, marking each hour's passage in a silent, steady melt. In a world without minute hands or digital readouts, time itself was a substance being consumed, its passage visible in the shrinking column of wax and the growing pool of molten light beneath it. This deep connection between flame and the sacred makes candles central to festivals across the globe. During Hanukkah, the 9-branched menorah is lit each night to commemorate the miracle of a single day's worth of sacred oil burning for 8 days in the reclaimed temple. Each small flame is a testament to resilience, faith, and the victory of light in a time of darkness. In the Hindu festival of Diwali, rows of small clay lamps called diyas are placed in windows and doorways. Their light is an invitation to the goddess Lakshmi, a celebration of the victory of good over evil, and a guide for ancestral spirits. The candle's light here is not passive, it is an active participant in the cosmic order, a beacon for the divine. This symbolism seeped into our very language. To snuff out a candle became the universal metaphor for death, for the abrupt and final end of a life's flame. Conversely, to light a candle meant to ignite knowledge, to spark hope, or to honor a memory. The phrase "carrying a candle for someone" speaks of a quiet, enduring loyalty that persists like a solitary flame in the dark. From the smoky tallow cottage to the pristine beeswax altar, from marking the hours to inviting the gods, the candle taught us to see light not just as a physical phenomenon, but as a living metaphor for everything we hold sacred and fragile. Its gentle glow is a direct line to the moment our ancestors first learned to keep the night at bay, not just with heat but with meaning. That fragile candle flame illuminated the world of the tailor, whose most essential tool holds a sharp and clever history. Scissors are a quiet masterpiece of leverage, 2 blades pivoting around a central point to concentrate force into a clean, precise cut. This simple cross-blade design is far older than most realize. In the workshops of ancient Mesopotamia, around 1,500 years before the Common Era, craftsmen were already using spring scissors. These were fashioned from a single piece of bronze, bent into a U shape so that the 2 blades were joined at the handle. You used them by squeezing the arms together, and the metal's natural spring would push them apart again. They were ingenious but limited. The revolutionary leap came with the Romans, those relentless improvers. They invented the pivoted scissors, where 2 separate blades were joined by a screw or rivet right in the middle. This pivot point changed everything, allowing for longer blades, more powerful cuts, and far greater control. With this design, essentially the same one we use today, the scissors were ready to shape civilization. They became indispensable to the tailor, the barber, and the surgeon, professions that rely on precision to define form and function. The guilds of medieval Europe understood this power intimately. A master tailor's shears were not just tools, they were symbols of his hard-won expertise and his membership in an exclusive brotherhood. These shears were often large, beautifully made, and sometimes even passed down through generations. To hold them was to hold the authority to transform raw cloth into social identity, to cut the very fabric of status and fashion. But this power to sever made scissors potent in the realm of the unseen as well. Folklore from many cultures imbued them with protective magic. A common practice was to place a pair of scissors, open in the shape of a cross, beneath a pillow or at the foot of a bed. It was believed their sharp, metallic presence could snip through the ethereal threads of a nightmare before it could fully form, guarding the sleeper's mind. In healing rituals, scissors were sometimes used symbolically to cut ties with an illness or a streak of bad luck, a physical act representing a spiritual separation. This duality, as both a creator of form and a cutter of unseen bonds, speaks to the deep human recognition of the scissor's fundamental power. It is the power of division, of making a decisive separation that allows for something new to take shape. Every snip that trimmed a beard, shaped a garment, or even performed a delicate surgery was a small act of transformation, a controlled violence in service of order, beauty, or health. So the next time you hear that familiar metallic whisper of blades closing, remember you are hearing an echo of Roman engineering, of guild secrets, and of an ancient belief that the right cut could protect not just clothes but the human soul itself. The sharp snip of scissors creates order, but a single, sharp sound can command an entire crowd. The whistle is a tiny instrument of immense authority, compressing human breath into a piercing note that cuts through chaos. Its story begins in the deep past, not on a sports field, but in the hands of our earliest ancestors. The oldest known whistles are simple tubes of bone or clay, some dating back tens of thousands of years. They are among humanity's first musical instruments, proof that our desire to shape breath into sound is as ancient as language itself. But from the very beginning, this sound was rarely just for music. It was a tool for survival. A shepherd on a lonely hillside could use a bone whistle to signal his dog, directing the flock with a coded series of notes. A night watchman pacing the walls of a medieval town would blow his whistle to mark the hour and alert others to danger, his sound a beacon in the silent dark. For sailors on a fog-shrouded sea, before radios or even reliable bells, a whistle's shrill call could coordinate actions on deck or signal between ships, a lifeline of sound when sight failed. This was sound as a practical extension of the human will across distance. Yet some cultures harnessed the power of the whistle for far more profound and unsettling purposes. The Aztecs crafted objects now known as death whistles. These are not simple tubes but intricate ceramic sculptures, often shaped like skulls or decapitated heads. When you blow into them, they do not produce a clean, sharp tone. Instead, they emit a harrowing, shrieking wail that sounds uncannily like a human scream in agony. Historians and archaeologists believe these were used in rituals related to Mictlantecuhtli, the god of the dead. The terrifying sound may have been employed in battle to psychologically intimidate enemies, or more likely, during solemn ceremonies to mimic the cries of the dead or the wind of the underworld. This was a whistle that did not coordinate the living, but invoked the realm of the spirits, turning human breath into a vessel of sacred terror. Other pre-Columbian cultures in the Americas created whistles with a different kind of magic. They crafted beautiful, detailed whistles in the shapes of birds and animals. These were more than toys or ornaments. A hunter might use a duck-shaped whistle to mimic the call of the bird, luring it within range. But scholars also suggest these instruments could have been used for complex communication over long distances in dense forests or mountainous terrain, where a specific bird call might convey a pre-arranged message. They could even represent a form of sympathetic magic where the sound of the creature captured in clay gave the user a connection to its essence or summoned its presence. In these examples, the whistle becomes a tool for dialogue not just between people, but between humanity and the natural world. So when a referee today raises a plastic whistle to their lips to stop a game, they are tapping into a lineage that spans millennia. That sharp blast is a direct descendant of the shepherd's signal, the watchman's alert, and the sailor's fog-bound call. It carries a faint echo of the Aztec ritual scream and the hunter's mimicked bird song. It is a reminder that long before megaphones or sirens, we mastered the art of projecting our presence through a simple, focused stream of air. That tiny device in their mouth is a pocket-sized time machine, proving that the need to be heard above the noise is one of the most fundamental human stories ever told. That piercing whistle commands attention, but the silent padlock demands respect. It is a promise of privacy made solid in iron and brass, a global invention born from the universal need to say, "This is mine and you may not enter." The earliest padlocks were ingenious exercises in simple mechanics. The Romans, masters of practical engineering, crafted padlocks with a clever spring mechanism. The key was a long, thin rod with teeth at the end. When inserted into the lock, these teeth would depress internal springs, allowing a shackle to be released. It was a system of contained tension, a tiny trap waiting for the right key to disarm it. Far to the north, Viking and Scandinavian smiths developed a different kind of brilliance, the letterlock padlock. These were heavy, ornate objects, often shaped like animals or mythic beasts. Their secret was not a spring, but a series of rotating rings or discs around the shackle, each marked with runes or symbols. To open it, you had to align all the rings in a precise, secret sequence, turning the lock itself into a combination device. It was security through knowledge, where the code was literally in your hands. But the most intellectually elegant padlocks came from ancient China. For centuries, Chinese metalworkers perfected the puzzle lock. These were masterpieces of miniature engineering, where the keyhole was hidden and the shackle was trapped by a series of internal latches or sliding plates. Opening it required a precise sequence of pushes, pulls, and twists, sometimes on seemingly decorative parts of the lock itself. It was less about brute force and more about solving a three-dimensional riddle. This transformed security from a physical barrier into a mental challenge, blending protection with playful ingenuity. This deep connection between locks and profound secrets is etched into our oldest stories. In Greek mythology, the great titan Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. As punishment, Zeus did not just chain him to a rock, he sent an eagle to eternally devour his liver. But the chains and the rock were his prison, and the fire he stole was the ultimate locked-away secret, knowledge that the gods wished to keep for themselves. More directly, there is Pandora's box, which in the original myth was actually a large jar or pithos. It was sealed shut not just with a lid, but with a heavy lock. This lock was the divine seal containing all the evils of the world. When Pandora's curiosity overcame her and she unlocked it, she unleashed misery upon humanity, leaving only hope trapped inside. The lock here is the boundary between order and chaos, the fragile barrier holding back the unknown. The very development of the portable padlock maps directly onto human social evolution. Its rise parallels the growth of trade, the accumulation of personal wealth beyond simple tools, and the need to secure goods on merchant ships and caravans. It reflects the moment when society grew complex enough that you couldn't always trust your neighbor, and when you had possessions valuable enough to warrant a dedicated, mobile guardian. The padlock is the manifestation of a new idea that some things are so valued they require a permanent, personal promise of exclusion. So the next time you hear the heavy click of a padlock snapping shut, you are hearing more than a bolt engaging. You are hearing the echo of a Roman spring, the silent turn of a Viking rune ring, and the satisfying slide of a Chinese puzzle falling into place. You are participating in an ancient ritual of trust and distrust, protecting your secrets with a technology born from our deepest desire to keep some things forever and solely our own. That padlock secures a chest, but a smaller, gentler protector guards the hands that fill it. The thimble is a miniature dome of defiance, a shield forged not for battlefields, but for the countless tiny battles fought with needle and thread. For thousands of years, as long as people have sown, they have sought to protect their pushing fingers. The earliest thimbles were not metal at all, but simple caps of tough leather, bone, or horn. These organic shields were functional, born from the immediate need to push a needle through resistant hide or layered cloth without piercing your own skin. They were the first line of defense in the daily work of creating and mending the material world. But as metalworking advanced, so did the thimble's dignity. Craftsmen began casting them from bronze, and for those who could afford it, silver. A metal thimble was a mark of a serious seamstress or tailor, a tool that would last a lifetime and ring with a satisfying tap with every stitch. In the Victorian era, this practicality blossomed into sentiment. Thimbles became exquisite love tokens, tiny canvases for engravers. They might be adorned with intricate floral patterns, initials, or even short messages of affection. Gifting a finely engraved silver thimble was a romantic gesture, an acknowledgement of the receiver's skill and domestic virtue, a promise that literally fit on the tip of a finger. Yet this domestic object occasionally ventured into entirely different realms. In the 17th century, some clever soul realized a thimble could serve a double duty. Its small, standardized volume made it a perfect, if tiny, measuring cup. Apothecaries might use them for precise portions of medicine, but more memorably, they became associated with spirits. To pour someone just a thimbleful of rum or whiskey was to offer a modest, controlled dram. A phrase that survives in our language long after the practice faded, linking this tool of sewing to the careful measurement of comfort. Centuries later, during the profound hardship of the Great Depression, the thimble took on a new role, one of subtle promotion. Salesmen for everything from sewing machine companies to insurance agencies would give away thimbles as free gifts. These promotional thimbles, often made of aluminum or cheap metal, were practical items in a time when every household mended and made do. They were a small gesture of goodwill, a useful object that kept a company's name literally at the fingertips of potential customers, demonstrating how even in economic crisis, this tiny tool adapted to the needs of the moment. So the next time you see a thimble, do not see just a sewing aid. See the leather cap of an ancient tailor, the silver love token of a Victorian suitor, the improvised dram cup of a sailor, and the hopeful giveaway of a struggling salesman. It is a monument to the perseverance of craft, a testament to the human ability to protect our creative hands, and a quiet symbol that even the smallest shield can carry the weight of centuries. That thimble shields the hand, but another object has long been tasked with holding identity itself in place. The hairpin is an ancient paradox, a delicate instrument of beauty that often concealed a sharp and practical point. For thousands of years, since the very dawn of settled life in the Neolithic era, people have used these simple shafts to secure more than just hair. They secured social order. In the classical world of Greece and Rome, the hairpin, or accuse, was an engineering necessity. Women's elaborate hairstyles, those towering curls and intricate braids you see on statues, were not held by magic or glue. They were architectural marvels built with the support of long, sturdy pins. A Roman matron might use dozens of them to construct her complex updo, each one a hidden strut in the edifice of her public appearance. But these were not hidden purely for function. The ends that remained visible were often spectacular, crafted from ivory, gold, or silver, and tipped with pearls or precious gemstones. To remove one was to begin the careful dismantling of a carefully crafted persona, a private act behind closed doors. Far to the east in ancient China, the hairpin carried even heavier symbolic weight. Here, materials spoke a clear language. A pin carved from vibrant jade was not merely beautiful, it was a direct statement of high rank and virtue. Jade was believed to possess protective, even spiritual qualities, guarding the wearer from harm and attracting benevolent energy. The style and placement of a hairpin could also broadcast a woman's marital status to the world, a silent but universally understood signal within the culture. This object, then, was a keystone of identity, physically holding a hairstyle in place while metaphorically holding one's social position intact. Yet that slender shaft could pivot from symbol to weapon in an instant. In Japan, the geisha and other women of the Edo period mastered this duality. Their hair ornaments, known as kanzashi, were breathtaking works of art, seasonal flowers crafted from silk and metal. But among these decorations, they would often wear a long, sharp hairpin, simple and unadorned. In a society where women had limited means of defense, this pin was a last resort weapon, easily drawn from the hair to ward off an attacker. The same tool that crafted an image of exquisite, fragile beauty could become a stark instrument of survival. From the jade pins of a Chinese noblewoman to the hidden blades of a geisha, the hairpin whispers a consistent truth about the ancient world. The most personal objects were never just decorative. They were armor, language, and leverage, all rolled into a few inches of metal or stone. They prove that what holds us together often has a point in every sense of the word. Even the most private grooming ritual has a history etched in bone and gold. The toothpick is a testament to a concern as old as humanity itself, the universal desire to care for our teeth. Evidence for this stretches back to our very cousins, the Neanderthals. Archaeologists have examined Neanderthal teeth and found distinct parallel grooves etched into the enamel. These marks are not from chewing, but from the repeated, habitual use of a small, stiff tool to dislodge food. It is a silent, intimate record of a Neanderthal, perhaps using a sliver of bone or wood, attending to an annoyance we all know, a piece of meat stuck between the teeth. This simple act of comfort connects us across a vast evolutionary divide. But as societies grew complex, so did the toothpick's symbolism. In the opulent cities of ancient Mesopotamia, a toothpick was not a throwaway splinter. For the elite, it was a slender spike of gold, a tiny rod of pure wealth used for a most mundane task. To own a gold toothpick was to declare that even the most basic aspects of your personal care were touched by luxury, that your mouth was a space worthy of precious metal. The Romans, masters of social ritual and personal vanity, turned dental care into an art form. They produced elaborate toothpick sets, often combining a pick with an ear scoop on a single decorative chain. These were not hidden in a bathroom, they were worn as pendants displayed as jewelry. Using your toothpick in public with a certain refined delicacy was a performance of good manners and civilization. It said you cared for your body and respected the social space of others by presenting yourself as clean and orderly. This public ritual continued through the Middle Ages in Europe. At the noble table, a fine toothpick made from a goose quill or silver was a standard accessory. To pick your teeth thoughtfully after a meal was considered a sign of refinement, a final, polite punctuation to the feast. It was a small, visible act that separated the courtly from the coarse. Meanwhile, in Japan, artisans developed what we now recognize as the traditional toothpick, with one pointed end and one decoratively carved end. But this design held a beautiful, considerate secret. That carved end was not just for ornament, it was a functional feature. After use, you could carefully break it off. This broken piece served a dual purpose. It signaled that the toothpick was used and should not be reused by another, and it provided a small rest to keep the soiled tip from touching the table. This was hygiene elevated to a thoughtful, almost poetic social contract, a tiny act of respect for the next person. So that simple wooden pick you might use after dinner carries the weight of deep history. It is a direct descendant of a Neanderthal's bone splinter, a Roman's pendant of vanity, and a Japanese tradition of elegant consideration. It proves that our concern for a bright smile and a clean mouth is not a modern vanity, but an ancient shared human story, one small pick at a time. The sound of a bell is one of humanity's oldest forms of broadcast, a voice of bronze that carries further than any shout. It begins in the ancient temples of India and China, not as a signal but as a spiritual tool. When struck, a temple bell produces a deep, resonant tone that vibrates through the air and, more importantly, through the body of the listener. The purpose was to clear the mind. That initial strike was meant to shatter the clutter of everyday thought, and the long, fading hum that followed created a space of pure, empty awareness, a perfect moment to invite the divine. The bell was not announcing something, it was preparing a sacred interior space within each person who heard it. To achieve this, Chinese metallurgists performed what seemed like magic. They mastered the art of casting massive bronze bells, some weighing many tons, with a sophistication that still astounds engineers today. These were not simple domes. They were cast with precise, calculated thicknesses in different areas, often with an almond-shaped cross-section. This allowed a single bell to produce two distinct, clear musical notes when struck in different spots, a phenomenon known as a twin tone. The crafting of such an instrument was a sacred science, blending spiritual intention with a profound understanding of harmonics and metal. Across the world, in medieval Europe, the bell found a different home at the heart of the community. The church bell tower was the tallest structure for miles, and its voice governed every aspect of life. Its peals were a shared language. One pattern would call the faithful to Mass, another, slower toll, would signal a death in the village, marking the passage of a soul with a somber, public rhythm. But perhaps its most constant duty was marking time itself. Before personal pocket watches, the bell divided the day into canonical hours, ringing for matins, lauds, and vespers. It told farmers when to pause, laborers when to rest, and the entire town when to gather. The bell was the community's heartbeat, its sound weaving the individual lives of villagers into a single, shared timeline. This function became a matter of life and death on the open ocean. On sailing ships, time was not abstract, it was the essential framework for survival. A crew was divided into watches, and their rotation was governed by the ship's bell. Striking the bell once marked the first half hour of a 4-hour watch. 2 bells meant an hour had passed, and so on, up to 8 bells at the watch's end. In the fog, in the dark, in the roar of a storm, that clear, metallic ring cut through the chaos. It told a weary sailor below deck when his rest was over and his duty began, maintaining the relentless order that kept the ship and all its souls afloat. Underlying all these practical uses is a nearly universal belief in the bell's spiritual power. From the temples of Asia to the village churches of Europe, the sound of a bell was thought to purify the air, to drive away malevolent spirits and negative energies. This is why bells often rang during storms, not just as a warning to people, but as a defense against the chaotic forces of nature. The bell's clear, penetrating tone was seen as a weapon of light against the formless dark, a sonic shield for an entire community. So whether calling to prayer, marking a death, pacing a sailor's watch, or guarding against the unseen, the bell has always been more than a noisemaker. It is a technology of order, a tool for projecting harmony into the world, and a reminder that sometimes the most powerful messages are not spoken but rung. That bell's voice was shaped by bronze, but the words it might announce were first shaped by a far quieter vessel. The inkwell held the fluid of history, a humble container for the most volatile substance of all human thought. Before the convenience of ballpoint pens, every written word began as a liquid, carefully stored in a small pot. In ancient Egypt, a scribe's kit was a sacred toolkit. He would carry a reed pen, a palette with wells for different colored inks, and cakes of solid pigment. To write, he would dip his pen into water and rub it on the ink cake, liquefying just enough history for a few lines of hieroglyphs. The ink itself was often soot-based, carbon black mixed with gum arabic, a recipe so stable it remains perfectly legible on papyrus after thousands of years. The Roman Empire ran on ink. Their inkwells, fashioned from practical bronze or simple pottery, sat on the desks of tax collectors, military clerks, and poets alike. The bureaucracy that built roads and levied taxes depended on the constant flow of this dark liquid onto wax tablets and parchment. Every legal contract, every love letter, every decree from the emperor began with a dip into one of these wells. But it was in the silent scriptoriums of medieval monasteries that the inkwell took on its most profound role. Here, in the flickering candlelight, a monk would spend years of his life copying texts by hand. His inkwell was not merely a tool, it was an altar of preservation. As the world outside fragmented, these scribes dipped their quills over and over, transferring the wisdom of antiquity, the words of the Bible, and the seeds of philosophy onto new parchment. They were not just copying, they were building an ark of knowledge, one careful letter at a time, and the inkwell was the wellspring from which that entire civilization-saving project flowed. The very composition of that ink tells its own dramatic story. For centuries, the standard was iron gall ink. It was made from a surprisingly organic recipe, oak galls, which are abnormal growths on oak trees caused by wasp larvae. These galls were crushed and mixed with iron sulfate and gum arabic. The result was an ink that started as a pale gray-brown but oxidized on the page to a deep, enduring black. This was the ink used for some of history's most pivotal documents, from the Magna Carta to Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks. Its permanence gave us a legible window into the past, but it also carried a hidden flaw. Over centuries, the acidic iron compounds can slowly eat through the parchment or paper, causing the very words it saved to crumble at the edges. The ink that guaranteed immortality also contained the seeds of decay, a poignant metaphor for the fragility of the history it recorded. So the inkwell is far more than an old-fashioned stationary item. It is the physical vessel of literacy itself. It represents the moment an abstract idea becomes a permanent mark, the tool that built bureaucracies, preserved faith, and transmitted ideas across the abyss of time. Every time a scribe, a scholar, or a revolutionary dipped their pen, they were drawing from a well of potential, not knowing which of those wet, black lines would go on to change the world. That ink flowed onto a surface that could be wiped clean, a technology of thought as temporary as a breath. The stylus was the pencil of the ancient world, a pointed instrument designed not for ink but for incision. Its companion was the wax tablet, a wooden frame filled with a layer of darkened beeswax. To write, you would press the sharp metal, bone, or ivory tip into the wax, leaving a clear, pale groove. This was the ultimate reusable notebook. A student could practice his letters, a merchant could tally his accounts, and a poet could draft his verses, all on the same small, portable surface. The magic was in the other end of the stylus, which was flat and blunt. When you made a mistake or needed a fresh start, you would simply turn the tool around and use that smooth end to warm and flatten the wax, erasing your words completely. This simple, brilliant action gave us a phrase that has lasted 2,000 years. The Latin term verta stylum literally means to turn the stylus. Figuratively, it meant to correct an error, to rethink a position. Our modern idea of turning over a new leaf carries the same echo of that physical act of smoothing a surface to begin again. This tool brought writing out of the temple and the scribe's studio and into the streets and schoolrooms. For a Roman schoolboy, his set of wax tablets and a stylus were as common as a backpack and laptop are today. He would painstakingly copy lines from Virgil, his stylus squeaking faintly against the wax. A shopkeeper in Pompeii might use his tablet to record a debt owed for a shipment of olive oil, the numbers etched firmly beside a customer's name. A soldier stationed at a remote fort on the edge of the empire, like Vindolanda in northern Britain, would use his stylus to write a birthday invitation to a friend at the next garrison, the casual words pressed into wax asking him to come and make the day more enjoyable. These were the ephemeral thoughts of daily life, never meant to be permanent, and that is what makes the rare surviving wax tablet so astonishing. In waterlogged, oxygen-deprived soils like those at Vindolanda, the wood of the tablet frames has sometimes survived with a ghostly impression of the wax writing still visible in the wood grain beneath. It is as if the thought itself has left a fossil. We are not reading grand history on these objects, we are overhearing a conversation from 2 millennia past. We see a child's clumsy handwriting, a shopping list for a dinner party, a terse military report. The stylus made writing a practical, everyday act, and in doing so, it gave a voice to the ordinary moments that usually vanish without a trace. That pointed tool, with its clever dual purpose, reminds us that the urge to record, to calculate, and to communicate is woven into the fabric of the most mundane day, and that sometimes the most profound histories are found not in stone, but in wax, waiting to be smoothed away by the turn of a stylus. The stylus gave voice to the ordinary, but it needed light to be read after sunset. For this, our ancestors turned to one of the most intimate and persistent companions in history, the oil lamp. For thousands of years, this was the primary source of artificial light in the home, the temple, and the tomb. Its evolution is a map of human ingenuity, artistry, and spiritual longing. The earliest lamps were beautifully simple adaptations, little more than a seashell or a hollowed-out stone filled with animal fat or oil, with a strip of plant fiber laid in it as a wick. This was the first time we learned to trap a flame in a portable vessel, to carry a piece of the hearth's warmth and safety to any corner of a room. As civilizations advanced, so did the lamp's design. The Romans, in particular, elevated it to an art form. They mass-produced lamps from terracotta and bronze, pressing wet clay into molds that left intricate scenes on the discus, the lamp's central panel. These were not blank objects, they were tiny, flickering canvases. One lamp might show the goddess Venus rising from the sea, another might depict a gladiator's victory, and others featured scenes of daily life, comedy, or even erotic imagery. To light such a lamp was not just to push back the dark, it was to cast dancing shadows of myth and story onto your walls, turning an evening at home into a private theater of flame. The fuel inside tells its own story of geography and trade. Across the Mediterranean, the clean, steady light of olive oil was preferred, linking the lamp directly to the sacred tree that symbolized peace and prosperity. In coastal regions, the cheaper, smokier light of fish oil was common, a practical use of the sea's bounty. And in the far north, where olives could not grow, people turned to whale oil or seal oil, harnessing the fat of great ocean creatures to fuel their long winter nights. The smell of a burning lamp, whether the faintly sweet scent of olive oil or the pungent aroma of fish oil, would have been as familiar and defining as the scent of a home itself. This humble light took on profound spiritual duties. In tombs from Egypt to Rome, a lamp was a standard burial good placed beside the deceased. Its purpose was explicit: to light the way through the terrifying darkness of the underworld, to guide the soul on its journey to whatever awaited beyond. The flame was a companion in the loneliest of passages. In Jewish tradition, the lighting of the Sabbath lamps, the Friday night ritual that welcomes a day of rest, centers on a specific oil lamp, the menorah, or a pair of designated candles. This act sanctifies time itself, separating the holy from the mundane with the kindling of a flame. The lamp's light becomes a symbol of divine presence, memory, and peace. So the next time you flip a switch and flood a room with instant, shadowless light, remember the world that came before. a world defined by a single, fragile, moving point of light. The oil lamp was more than a tool, it was a small, brave declaration against the void. Its flickering flame held back monsters both real and imagined, illuminated sacred texts and love letters, and cast the shadow of a comforting hand on a child's wall. It represents a fundamental human truth that we have always been willing to burn a little of our precious resources, whether oil or courage, to create a circle of warmth and meaning in the vast and ancient dark. That small flame illuminated the cloak fastened at the shoulder, held secure by an object of equal artistry and purpose. The fibula was the ancient world's safety pin, a brilliant solution to a universal problem: how to keep your clothes on. But to call it a mere fastener is to miss its true nature. This was a piece of engineering, a canvas for identity, and a key that helps us unlock entire eras. At its core, the fibula was a clever spring mechanism. A pin, often quite long, was attached to a curved bow or plate, and its point was caught by a hook or catch plate. A small spring, either a simple hinge or a complex coil, provided tension. With a simple press and slide, you could secure a heavy woolen cloak against the wind or fasten the shoulder of a tunic. This was technology worn on the body, a daily interaction with precision mechanics that had to be both reliable and beautiful they were. Among the Celtic peoples, metalworkers transformed the fibula into a breathtaking art form. They worked in what is known as the Latin style, named for a site in Switzerland. These were not simple pins, they were swirling, organic explosions of metal. The bow would dissolve into intricate curves, spirals, and triskells, shapes that seemed to mimic vines, waves, or perhaps the motion of the cosmos itself. A Celtic fibula was a piece of wearable philosophy, its abstract patterns likely holding meanings about nature, the gods, or tribal identity that we can still admire but no longer fully decipher. It fastened more than fabric, it fastened the wearer to a worldview. The Romans, as always, brought system and signal to the object. In the legions, the style of a soldier's fibula could broadcast specific information. A certain type of crossbow fibula might be associated with officers or cavalry. The materials mattered too, a bronze fibula for an auxiliary soldier, perhaps a silver one for a centurion. In a mass of identical armor and helmets, these small clasps were points of personal distinction and military hierarchy, a quiet language of rank recognized by every man in the camp. This is why fibulae are such treasures to archaeologists. They are one of the most common metal finds in digs from the Iron Age through the Viking era. Unlike a pot that might be used for generations, a fibula was personal jewelry, often lost or placed in a grave with its owner. And because fashions in brooches changed quite quickly, sometimes within a single generation, they become incredibly precise dating tools. An archaeologist uncovering a settlement layer can often look at the style of a fibula and say, this was the early 2nd century, or this was the Viking Age of the 9th century. Each one is a tiny time capsule, its design a snapshot of the exact moment it was made. From the abstract Celtic spirals to the standardized Roman crossbow forms, and onward to the intricate animal styles of the Vikings, the fibula charts a continuous thread. It tells the story of how people chose to present themselves to the world, using the very object that held their world together. It was both a practical clasp and a personal crest, proving that sometimes the most revealing histories are pinned quietly to our shoulders. That clasp held a cloak for a warrior, but another small object was a focus of intense, quiet concentration for a king. The gaming piece is a universal artifact of human leisure, a tiny token of pure, purposeless play. For thousands of years, across every culture, people have carved these simple markers, proving that our need for structured fun is as ancient as our need for shelter. One of the oldest board games ever discovered is the royal game of unearthed in the royal tombs of Mesopotamia and dating back 4,500 years. Its board was a beautiful inlaid mosaic of shell and lapis lazuli, and its pieces were simple, distinctive circular discs. Players would cast pyramidal dice, a kind of tetrahedron, and race their pieces along the board's intricate path. This was not a child's diversion, it was a pastime for royalty and elites, a sophisticated battle of chance and tactics played in the very shadow of ziggurats. Far to the north, Viking warriors and traders were equally devoted to their game of strategy, Nefertafel. This was a game of asymmetric siege where a king piece, surrounded by his defenders, attempted to escape to the board's edge while a larger force of attackers tried to capture him. The pieces themselves were often beautiful, crafted from polished glass, bone, or precious amber, their smooth surfaces worn from countless matches in longhouse firesides. In a culture famed for raiding, these pieces speak of the hours between adventures, of mental contests that hone the same strategic thinking used in planning a voyage or a battle. But perhaps no game carried heavier spiritual weight than Senet, played along the banks of the Nile over 3,000 years ago. Its name means the game of passing, and its flat, rectangular pieces, moved along a grid of 30 squares, were believed to mirror the soul's perilous journey through the Juwat, the Egyptian underworld. The game was so intertwined with the afterlife that Senet boards were commonly placed in tombs. The belief was potent that playing the game in life taught you the rules for the ultimate journey in death, and that a successful player in this world would be favored by the gods in the next. What transforms these pieces from toys into profound artifacts is their universal social function. They were, and still are, social lubricants. A board laid between two people is a temporary treaty, a space where rivals can engage in fierce but harmless conflict, where conversation flows alongside moves, and where social bonds are strengthened through shared focus. They are tools for teaching logic and foresight to children long before the concepts have names. The roll of a die, the slide of a piece, these are the mechanics of a timeless human ritual. So the next time you place a pawn on a board, you are participating in a tradition that welcomed Mesopotamian kings to a moment of leisure, that focused a Viking's strategic mind, and that prepared an Egyptian soul for eternity. That small piece in your hand is a direct link to the profound, simple truth that to play is to be human. A king's decree or a merchant's promise is only as solid as the weight that measures it. Long before coins, the true currency of trust was a simple stone or metal block, a standardized weight. In the bustling markets of ancient Sumer and the orderly cities of the Indus Valley, commerce depended on these unassuming objects. They were not rough chunks of rock but carefully crafted artifacts, often shaped into animals like ducks or lions, and stamped with the seal of a king or a temple. That stamp was everything. It transformed a piece of bronze or carved stone from a random object into a fragment of the law itself, a physical embodiment of a ruler's guarantee. When a merchant placed a duck-shaped weight on one side of a balance scale, he was invoking the full authority of the state to certify this transaction. The weight was a silent witness, ensuring that 10 shekels of grain in one city was exactly equal to 10 shekels of silver in another. This consistency built empires, allowing trade to flow across vast distances on a foundation of mutual understanding. The very word shekel reveals this deep connection. It began not as a coin but as a unit of weight in Mesopotamia, referring to a specific mass of barley. Over centuries it evolved, becoming the name for a weight of silver, and finally the silver coin itself. The money in your pocket began its life as a measure of grain on a scale. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh's role as guarantor of cosmic order, known as Mat, extended directly into the marketplace. Officials used a standard weight called the Nesut Biti, meaning king of Upper and Lower Egypt. This was the royal benchmark against which all other weights in the land were measured. To use a false weight was not just cheating your neighbor, it was an offense against the pharaoh and a disruption of the divine balance of the universe itself. This moral dimension echoes through millennia. In the Hebrew Bible, the book of Proverbs delivers a stern condemnation, stating that dishonest scales are an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. The implication is profound. Fair measurement is not merely good business, it is a sacred duty, a direct reflection of one's character and righteousness. In a world where every transaction was a personal agreement, the integrity of the weight was the integrity of the community. So these small, often beautifully shaped stones are far more than relics of ancient accounting. They are the crystallized idea of fairness. They represent the monumental human struggle to replace suspicion with trust, to create a common language of value that could bridge cultures and build civilizations. In a world of subjective opinions, they were an early, hard-won attempt at objective truth. Every time you trust that a pound of flour from the store is indeed a pound, you are relying on a system of trust forged in the fires of ancient markets and sanctified by the laws of kings and gods. That weight guaranteed the substance of a deal, but the mark on the contract guaranteed the will behind it. The personal seal is humanity's original signature, a carved emblem pressed into clay or wax that declared, "This is my word and it is final." Its power was absolute, transforming a simple lump of clay into a legally binding shield. The earliest and most mesmerizing form was the cylinder seal, invented in ancient Mesopotamia. This was a small, cylindrical stone, often made of hematite or lapis lazuli, intricately carved in reverse. To use it, a scribe would roll the seal across a wet clay tablet or over the clay lump securing a jar or door. As it turned, it would imprint a continuous miniature frieze, a story in the round. These scenes were not random, they were dense with meaning, depicting gods bestowing authority upon kings, mythic heroes battling chaos monsters, or symbols of fertility and power. Every time a merchant sealed a shipment of grain or a king ratified a treaty, he was rolling out his personal mythology, stamping his connection to the divine order directly onto the agreement. It was art as legal tender. Across the ancient world, different cultures adapted the concept. In Egypt and the Minoan palaces of Crete, people favored stamped seals, often with a carved face on one end and a loop on the back for stringing onto a cord. These were pressed straight down, leaving a single, powerful image, a scarab, a lion, a griffin. In the meticulously planned cities of the Indus Valley, thousands of small, square stamped seals have been found, carved with enigmatic script and images of animals like the famous unicorn bull. We cannot read their writing, but the seals themselves tell us these were a people of sophisticated trade and administration, using unique symbols to mark property and authenticate goods. The concept reached one of its most elegant and enduring forms in East Asia with the Chinese seal chop. Carved from stone, ivory, or precious jade, these were typically square or rectangular with characters carved in reverse on the base. The act of stamping with red cinnabar paste was, and for many artists still is, the final, crucial step in completing a work of calligraphy or a painting. That red mark is not a mere signature, it is an integral part of the artwork's balance and beauty, a visual promise of the artist's identity and approval. It carries the same weight as a handwritten name, but with a formal, ceremonial gravity that has persisted for over 2 millennia. The imagery chosen for any seal was never casual. Whether it was the name of a Mesopotamian official, the cartouche of an Egyptian pharaoh, the personal symbol of a Minoan merchant, or the stylized characters of a Chinese scholar, the design was a unique identifier, a condensed version of the owner's authority, lineage, or profession. To possess a seal was to hold a piece of your own sovereignty in your hand. This is why a broken seal meant immediate suspicion. On a sealed document or a secured storage jar, the intact clay or wax proved the contents had not been disturbed since the authority figure last touched it. A crack or a mismatch was evidence of tampering, a breach of trust that could nullify a contract or accuse a thief. The seal, therefore, invented the very idea of legal integrity for objects and information. It created a physical, inspectable link between an individual's will and a tangible outcome. In a world of few written contracts and vast distances, that small impression in clay was a fortress of personal promise, the ancient root of every notary's stamp, every wax seal on a diploma, and every digital signature that secures our world today. That personal seal marked a man's word, and the tool he used to shape his face marked his place in the world. The razor is an artifact of a fundamental human choice to remove what grows naturally. This is not a modern vanity, but an ancient ritual with roots in the Stone Age. The very first razors were not metal at all, but sharp, carefully shaped flakes of flint or obsidian. Imagine the patience and skill required to scrape a sharp edge along a jawline with a piece of stone, a testament to how deeply the desire for grooming is embedded in our species. With the dawn of metalworking, razors became symbols of status. In ancient Egypt, the ritual significance was absolute. Priests were required to shave their entire bodies, every hair from head to toe, as a sign of ritual purity. They needed to be clean, empty vessels to approach the gods. This practice turned the razor from a grooming tool into an instrument of the sacred, a necessary step to bridge the gap between the human and the divine. The ordinary Egyptian also shaved, but often wore elaborate wigs, creating a clear separation between the natural body and the cultivated social self. The Romans, ever focused on order and civilization, brought engineering to the practice. They developed folding razors with handles and blades, the direct ancestors of the straight razor. A Roman man's morning shave was a social performance, often done by a skilled servant in a public barber shop. To be clean-shaven was to identify with Roman urbanity and discipline, in contrast to the bearded barbarians beyond the empire's borders. A beard could mark you as a philosopher, a mourner, or a foreigner, but a smooth face declared you a citizen of a refined world. This connection between the razor and identity traveled to the farthest reaches of the ancient world. In Viking graves, alongside swords and shields, archaeologists often find finely made razors, tweezers, and combs. This discovery shatters the simplistic image of the unkempt warrior. For a Norse raider, grooming was part of the same ethos as maintaining a sharp blade. To be well kept was a sign of self-respect and readiness, a way to present oneself with pride whether sailing into battle or into a trading port. The presence of a razor in a grave suggests this personal care was considered essential for the journey to the afterlife as well. Throughout history, the presence or absence of facial hair has been a flashing signal of allegiance and ideology. When Alexander the Great ordered his Macedonian troops to shave, it was a tactical move to prevent enemies from grabbing their beards in close combat, but it also forged a uniform, modern identity for his army. Centuries later, Peter the Great of Russia imposed a beard tax, forcing his nobles to shave their traditional beards to visually align his court with Western European styles, using the face as a canvas for political reform. From the ritual purity of an Egyptian priest to the disciplined uniformity of a Roman legionary, from the proud grooming of a Viking to the enforced modernity of a Russian Tsar, the razor has always been more than a sharp edge. It is a tool of transformation, used to carve a personal identity out of nature and to shave away the old self to meet the expectations of a new day. That razor shaped the face, but the tool that followed it attended to the finest details. Tweezers are a pinch of history, a perfect demonstration of a design so effective it has remained virtually unchanged for millennia. In the tombs of ancient Egypt, alongside golden masks and canopic jars, archaeologists have found simple bronze tweezers. They were placed there for a reason. Grooming was considered essential for the afterlife. The Egyptians valued a clean, ordered appearance, and these tools were part of that final preparation, ensuring the deceased would be presentable for eternity. This was not vanity in the shallow sense. It was a component of dignity, a final act of care. The Romans elevated this daily ritual into a social art form. For a Roman citizen, personal grooming was a mark of civilization itself. A well-to-do Roman would own a cosmetics box, a personal kit containing a mirror, a strigil for scraping oil and dirt from the skin, a small spoon for ear cleaning, and almost always a pair of finely made tweezers. These were not crude implements. They were often crafted from bronze or silver, sometimes decorated and designed with a graceful spring in the metal. Their uses were wonderfully practical and varied. Of course, they were used for plucking eyebrows, shaping the beard line, or removing unwanted hair, adhering to the clean-shaven or carefully sculpted ideals of Roman fashion. But their function extended far beyond the bathhouse. In the home or on the battlefield, tweezers were a first-line medical tool. A soldier in his camp might use them to carefully extract a thorn or a splinter, or to remove a sliver of metal from a wound. In a world without antibiotics, preventing infection from a foreign object lodged in the skin was a matter of survival. The precision of tweezers made them indispensable for this delicate, painful work. Their utility stretched into the artisan's workshop as well. Goldsmiths and metalworkers used fine tweezers to place tiny granules of gold for intricate filigree work, or to handle minuscule components when crafting jewelry. In the hands of a surgeon, they could be used to grasp and tie off blood vessels. This one simple tool bridged the worlds of beauty, health, and high craft. And that is the true marvel, the design itself. Two strips of metal joined at one end, leveraging the principle of the spring and the fulcrum. When you squeeze, the tips meet with pinpoint accuracy. It is a lesson in minimalism and perfect engineering. Every pair of tweezers you find in a modern bathroom drawer is a direct descendant of those Egyptian bronze ones, the Roman silver ones. The form has never needed a revolution because it solved the problem perfectly on the first try. It speaks to a universal human trait, our relentless attention to the small things. Whether removing an offending hair, a painful splinter, or placing a speck of gold to create art, we have always sought the right tool to bring precision to our world. The tweezers are that tool, a quiet testament to the fact that sometimes history is held in the gentlest pinch. That gentle pinch of the tweezers attended to the smallest details, but another small, spinning disc was responsible for creating the very fabric of life itself. The spindle whorl is a humble object of immense power, a simple clay or stone disc with a hole in its center. It was slipped onto a wooden rod, the spindle, to give it weight and momentum. With this tool in hand, a person could perform a kind of daily magic, drawing out fibers of wool or flax and twisting them into strong, continuous thread. This was not a specialized craft, it was a universal skill, and the spindle whorl has been found in the ruins of homes from ancient Mesopotamia to Viking longhouses, from the highlands of Peru to the villages of China. Its constant presence tells a clear story. The creation of cloth was the bedrock of domestic economy, and it was overwhelmingly the work of women. For hours each day, while managing children, cooking, and tending animals, women would spin. The rhythmic drop and twist of the spindle was the background music of the ancient household, a quiet, productive hum that literally wove the community together. The thread they made would become clothing, blankets, sails, and trade goods. The spindle whorl, therefore, is a direct artifact of women's unseen economic engine, a weight that measured their immense contribution to survival and civilization. But these were not always plain, functional discs. Many were beautifully decorated. A whorl might be incised with spirals, sunbursts, or concentric circles. Others bore more complex symbols like protective eyes or stylized animals. These decorations were more than idle doodles. Spinning was a vulnerable act. You were taking a chaotic mass of raw fiber and imposing order upon it, creating something strong and useful from something fragile. In many cultures, this transformative process was believed to attract the attention of mischievous spirits who might tangle the thread or bring bad luck. The symbols carved into the wall, then, could have served as apotropaic charms, a layer of magical protection for the precious thread and the spinner herself. The patterns might also have been auspicious, meant to imbue the thread and the cloth it would become with qualities like strength, longevity, or good fortune. The wall was a tiny, spinning altar to the success of a daily miracle. This act of spinning thread is so fundamental that it became one of humanity's most enduring metaphors for destiny. In Greek mythology, the Moirai, the three fates, were spinners. Clotho spun the thread of a person's life onto her spindle. Lachesis measured its length, deciding one's lot. And Atropos, the inevitable one, cut it with her shears. Here, the domestic tool of the spindle whorl is elevated to a cosmic instrument. The very rhythm of a woman's daily work was mirrored in the god's management of mortal existence. The thread connects birth, life, and death, and the spindle is the axis around which it all turns. We hear echoes of this in fairy tales like Rumpelstiltskin, where the impossible task of spinning straw into gold speaks to the alchemical, almost supernatural power attributed to the spinner's craft. To spin was to participate in a primal act of creation, turning the raw materials of the world into something of meaning and purpose. So this small, often overlooked clay disc is a universe of meaning. It is an archaeological testament to the labor that built societies from the ground up. It is a protective talisman for a delicate, vital process, and it is a profound symbol connecting the rhythmic, hands-on work of the hearth to the grand, spinning machinery of the cosmos. The spindle whorl reminds us that some of the most powerful forces in human history were not wielded on battlefields, but in quiet corners spinning the very thread of life. That thread spun by the spindle whorl was often woven into clothing, and tucked within its folds or hanging from a neck was a more direct line of defense. The amulet is humanity's oldest wearable technology, a pocket-sized fortress against a world brimming with invisible threats. For our ancestors, danger was not just physical, it was spiritual. Misfortune, illness, and bad luck were seen as the work of malevolent spirits or envious glances, the infamous evil eye. The amulet was the countermeasure, a concentrated piece of symbolic power you could carry on your person. Its forms were as varied as human fear and hope. In ancient Egypt, the scarab beetle, carved from stone or molded from faience, was ubiquitous. It represented the god Khepri, who rolled the sun across the sky each morning, symbolizing rebirth and regeneration. To wear a scarab was to align yourself with this daily victory of light over darkness, to carry a piece of the sun's eternal cycle as a shield. It was placed over the heart of mummies, a final amulet for the journey through the underworld, proving its protective duty extended beyond death. The Romans had a surprisingly blunt symbol for warding off envy and harm, the fascinum. This was an amulet in the explicit shape of a phallus, often worn as a pendant by children or hung above doorways. The logic was rooted in potent symbolism. The life force and generative power it represented was believed to be so strong it could deflect malignant magic and ill will. It was less about vulgarity and more about deploying a force of nature as a spiritual deterrent. Meanwhile, Celtic artisans channeled spiritual energy into intricate, swirling patterns. The triskel, a triple spiral, was a sacred motif representing motion, cycles, and the interconnection of earth, water, and sky, or the realms of land, sea, and the other world. To wear a triskel amulet was not just to seek protection, but to carry a map of the cosmos, aligning the wearer with the fundamental, balanced forces of existence. The materials themselves were chosen with intention. A smooth, cool piece of jade was believed to promote healing and longevity. A glint of iron was thought to repel fairies and ghosts. Even organic materials held power, a shark's tooth for courage, a rabbit's foot for luck. These were not mere decorations, they were batteries for supernatural energy, charged by their form, their substance, and the rituals that activated them. This need for protection traveled everywhere. A sailor would nail a coin or a carved charm to the mast of his ship, begging the sea for safe passage. A mother would sew a tiny silver bell into her child's clothing, its sound meant to frighten away spirits that preyed on the young. Families buried protective amulets under the thresholds of their homes, creating an invisible barrier no evil could cross. The amulet represents a profound and universal human impulse, the desire to exert some control over a chaotic and frightening universe. When medicine was limited and disaster unpredictable, these objects offered a tangible form of hope. They were a fusion of art, faith, and primal psychology, a beautiful, desperate attempt to armor the soul. In a world we now explain with science, the impulse hasn't vanished, it has simply changed its costume. A lucky coin, a sentimental locket, a team jersey worn on game day, these are our modern amulets. We may no longer fear the evil eye, but we still reach for objects that make us feel safe, connected, and in control, proving that the need to carry a little magic close to the heart is a story as old as humanity itself. That amulet offered protection from unseen forces, but another tool was dedicated to transforming the visible world itself. The mortar and pestle are a partnership as old as settled life, a bowl and a club that together perform a kind of quiet, physical alchemy. Found in the ruins of Neolithic villages and still in use in modern kitchens and pharmacies today, this is one of humanity's most enduring and essential inventions. Its purpose is beautifully simple: to apply focused, repetitive force, to crush, to grind, to pulverize, but in that simple act lies the seed of civilization. With a mortar and pestle, hard, inedible grains could be turned into nourishing flour. Tough roots and dried herbs could be rendered into potent medicines. Vibrant minerals like ochre or lapis lazuli could be ground into brilliant pigments for paint. It was the original processor, the tool that unlocked the potential hidden within the raw materials of the earth. For the ancient pharmacist known as an apothecary, the mortar and pestle were the heart of the workshop. These were not the small ceramic sets we might imagine, but often large, heavy stone vessels, their interiors worn smooth from decades of use. Here, knowledge was literally ground into being. A healer would follow recipes passed down from master to apprentice, combining dried leaves, berries, seeds, and barks. The rhythmic, circular grinding did more than mix ingredients. It broke down cell walls, releasing essential oils and compounds, transforming a pile of separate elements into a unified, therapeutic powder. This was medicine as a physical craft, where the texture and consistency of the grind were as important as the ingredients themselves. The pestle's weight and the mortar's depth were calibrated for the task, whether creating a fine dust to be mixed into a salve or a coarse grind for a steeping tea. Every remedy began with this fundamental, hands-on transformation. This transformative power made the mortar and pestle a sacred tool for a more mysterious pursuit: alchemy. In the dim light of a medieval laboratory, the alchemist sought the secrets of matter itself, aiming to transmute base metals into gold and discover the elixir of life. His work always began at the mortar. Here he would grind minerals like cinnabar or sulfur, metals like lead or antimony, and strange organic compounds, reducing them to fine powders to be mixed and heated in complex experiments. The act of grinding was the first step in breaking down the old form, a necessary destruction before a new, purified substance could be created. In this context, the mortar and pestle were not just tools, they were instruments of philosophical revelation, the means to physically enact the alchemist's quest to uncover the fundamental principles hidden within nature. Yet for most people throughout history, the sound of the mortar and pestle was not one of mystery but of domestic rhythm. It was the background percussion of daily survival. In a village home, you might hear the steady thump of grain being pounded into flour for the day's bread. In another corner, the softer, circular grinding of herbs for a stew or a poultice for a child's fever. This sound meant someone was working to feed and heal the family. It was a sound of provision and care, so familiar it would have blended into the soundscape of life itself, as ordinary and essential as the crackle of a cooking fire. The mortar and pestle were so central that they became powerful symbols beyond their practical use. They represent the very idea of transformation through effort. The hard becomes soft, the separate becomes united, the raw becomes refined. This is the process of cooking, of healing, of creating art. It is the fundamental act of taking what the world gives you and through your own labor making it useful, beautiful, or sustaining. So this humble pair, the patient bowl and the diligent pounder, is a quiet titan of human history. It sits at the crossroads of food, medicine, art, and magic. It is a tool that has fed hungry families, concocted life-saving remedies, provided the colors for sacred paintings, and ground the ingredients for dreams of immortality. In its worn curves and smooth surface, we see the evidence of countless hands performing the same essential ritual, the act of turning the hard stuff of the world into something that sustains the body, heals the spirit, and colors our existence. The clasp is a tiny hinge of history. Without it, clothing would be little more than draped fabric, a blanket held in place by hope and a firm grip. This small, often overlooked fastener is the reason fashion could ever become complex, the mechanical secret behind every fitted sleeve, every close-fitting tunic, and every cloak that stayed on in a gale. Its evolution is the story of how we learned to literally hook our world together. The most ancient clasps were simple and functional, carved from bone or antler, a practical solution to the problem of a chilly draft. But as metalworking emerged, so did the opportunity for statement. In the Bronze Age, a cloak clasp could be an elaborate disc of bronze, embossed with spirals and concentric circles that caught the light. This was no mere button, it was a piece of wearable art, a public declaration of the wearer's access to a smith's skill and the prestige of metal itself. The materials always whispered a tale of status. A humble fisherman might use a toggle of carved wood, while a chieftain's wife would fasten her shawl with a clasp of gleaming silver, perhaps inlaid with a speck of amber. The object performing the same basic function could, through its substance, shout across a crowded room about wealth, power, and connection. The Romans gave us the word for one of the most elegant solutions, the fibula, a brooch that used a pin and catch mechanism, often beautifully decorated. But alongside these intricate pieces, the simpler hook and eye have been quietly doing their duty for just as long. This humble duo, a curved hook slipping into a loop, is a masterpiece of minimalist engineering. It requires no moving parts, just precision and tension. You can find versions of it on ancient Egyptian linens and holding together the armor of a medieval knight. Its genius is in its silent reliability. Then there is the aglet, the hardened tip of a shoelace. It seems trivial, but without that tiny bit of metal or plastic, the lace would fray and become impossible to thread. The aglet is the envoy that makes the negotiation between lace and eyelet possible. It is the clasp for the string, a facilitator for the entire system of lacing that allows a shoe to hug the foot. Together, these tiny fasteners enabled a sartorial revolution. Before secure clasps, clothing was largely loose and flowing, held with belts or pins. But with a reliable way to fasten two pieces of fabric edge to edge, tailors could dream bigger. They could create garments that followed the contours of the body, that had openings down the front that could be layered and secured at specific points. This changed everything. It changed how people moved, allowing for greater mobility in fitted garments designed for work or war. It changed how they presented themselves with clothing that could be more deliberately styled and closed. A well-fastened robe or coat created a clean, composed silhouette, a visual signal of order and self-possession. So every time you button a coat or zip a jacket, you are participating in an ancient continuum. You are using a technology that liberated clothing from being merely protective and made it expressive. That tiny metal hook or that simple plastic aglet is a direct descendant of the Bronze Age clasp. It is a piece of a puzzle, one that answers the fundamental question of how people for thousands of years have chosen to hold themselves together, to face their world not just covered but composed. That clasp holds our world together, but the vessel we raise to share it holds an even deeper communion. A cup is a circle you can hold, a simple curve of clay or metal that contains one of humanity's oldest rituals, the shared drink. From the most basic beaker to the legendary Holy Grail, this everyday object is a repository for stories, trust, and the very essence of community. Its shape invites gathering, its contents promise connection. In ancient Greece, the heart of intellectual and social life was the symposium, a drinking party for men. The cup used here, the kylix, was a wide, shallow bowl on a stem, designed to be lifted easily for conversation. But it was also a canvas. The inside of the bowl, the tondo, was often painted with a startling scene. As you drank your wine, you would be greeted by the image of a god, a scene from a myth or a snapshot of daily life. One famous kylix shows the god Dionysus reclining in a ship whose mast has sprouted grapevines. Another might show athletes competing or a reveler playing a game. The art was not just decoration, it was a topic of conversation, a shared visual experience that fueled the dialogue and wine flowing around the room. The cup framed the fellowship, its imagery becoming part of the memory of the evening itself. Far to the north, Celtic artisans expressed a different, more mystical vision in metal. The Gundestrup cauldron, a magnificent silver vessel from the 1st century before the Common Era, is not a cup for casual use. It is a ritual masterpiece, its panels hammered with scenes of breathtaking complexity. You see a horned god, likely Cernunnos, lord of animals, seated in meditation. You see a procession of warriors, a giant figure dipping smaller figures into the cauldron, perhaps a scene of rebirth. This was not a drinking vessel for a party, it was a sacred container for ceremonies, its silver surface telling the stories of the gods and the cycles of life, death, and regeneration. To drink from such a cup would be to partake in the myth itself. This act of sharing a cup is a universal language of trust. To offer someone a drink from your own vessel is a profound gesture. It says, "I have nothing to hide from you." In medieval Europe, sharing the ceremonial loving cup at a feast cemented alliances between lords. In marriage ceremonies across cultures, the couple drinks from a shared cup, symbolizing their united life. The cup becomes a physical token of a bond, its contents literally passing between individuals, blending their intentions. In religious practice, this idea is elevated to the divine. The cup holds libations, offerings of wine, water, or oil poured out for the gods. It is a bridge between the human and the supernatural, a vessel carrying our gratitude or supplication from our world into theirs. And from this sacred function springs one of the most enduring quests in legend, the search for a holy cup. Whether it is the Celtic cauldron of plenty that restores life, or the Christian Holy Grail said to have held the blood of Christ, the sacred cup represents the ultimate object of spiritual yearning. It is never just a thing to be found, but a test of purity, a catalyst for transformation. The quest for the Grail is not about possessing a trophy, but about achieving a state of grace worthy of the vessel. So the cup in your kitchen cabinet carries this immense lineage. It is the descendant of the Greek kylix that sparked philosophical debate, the Celtic cauldron that held cosmic stories, and the shared chalice that sealed 1,000 vows. Every time you offer someone a drink of water, you are performing a miniature ritual of trust. Every time you sip from a mug, you are holding a shape that has, for thousands of years, contained not just liquid, but the very substance of human connection, story, and spirit. The cup held the promise of shared community, but the tool that followed the bath ensured a more solitary form of preparation. The strigil was the ancient world's answer to the washcloth, a personal, curved blade of bronze or iron that performed a ritual of purification. After a vigorous workout in the Greek gymnasium or a session in the Roman baths, a citizen would coat their skin in olive oil. This oil did not moisturize, it trapped the grime and sweat from exercise. Then, using the strigil's carefully shaped concave edge, They would methodically scrape it all away, wiping the oily sludge from the blade onto the ground or into a small vessel. This was not a quick rinse, it was a deliberate physical act of cleansing that left the skin tingling and clean. The strigil was a tool of transformation, turning the sweaty, exhausted body back into a presentable social self. This simple act was deeply woven into the fabric of classical life. In Greece, the gymnasium was far more than a sports center. It was a hub of education, philosophy, and civic life. Young men trained their bodies and minds together, and the shared ritual of scraping clean afterwards was a social equalizer, a moment of camaraderie that followed competition. In Rome, the sprawling public bath complexes were the heart of the city, where citizens of all classes mingled. Your strigil was a personal possession you brought with you, like a towel and a flask of oil. Its design was elegant and functional, with a curved scraping blade at one end and a small, often decorated scoop or hook at the other, used for cleaning dirt from under the nails. To own a fine bronze strigil, perhaps with an incised pattern or a handle shaped like an athlete's leg, was to signal that you participated in this vital civic culture, that you cared for the body as a temple of civic virtue. The strigil's importance is etched in the silent testimony of graves. Archaeologists frequently find these tools placed beside skeletons in tombs from Greece to the farthest edges of the Roman Empire. This was not a casual inclusion. It meant the tool was considered essential for the final journey. Just as the living needed to scrape away the grime of the world to re-enter society, the deceased needed to be cleansed, prepared, and made presentable for the afterlife. The strigil in a grave is a poignant gesture of care, a final grooming from the living to equip their loved one with the dignity and cleanliness required for eternity. It bridges the gap between the daily routine and the ultimate transition, showing how deeply this practice was rooted in both physical and spiritual well-being. Ultimately, the strigil speaks to a classical ideal that might feel foreign today. Cleanliness here was not about soap and water, but about a disciplined, almost athletic process of renewal. It was about actively scraping away the evidence of exertion, of public life, and of the earth itself. This grooming was tied directly to ideals of athletic beauty, military readiness, and the polished appearance of a citizen who participated fully in the life of the city-state. The strigil was not a hidden bathroom implement, it was a public tool for a public body. Its curved metal shape is a direct, tactile link to the moment a Roman soldier, a Greek philosopher, or an ordinary baker finished his bath, scraped his skin clean, and stepped back out into the forum, ready to face the world. It reminds us that the rituals of the body are never just about the body, they are about preparing the self to take its place in the society it belongs to. The strigil prepared the body for society, but the iron nail prepared the world for us. This simple spike of forged metal is the silent, unseen skeleton upon which civilization was built. Without it, our world would quite literally fall apart. The Romans, those master builders, understood this necessity better than anyone. Their blacksmiths would heat an iron rod in a forge, then hammer one end to a sharp point and the other to a flat head, creating the familiar form we know today. But these were not uniform, machine-made pins. Each one was hand-forged, bearing the subtle marks of the smith's hammer, a unique fingerprint of ancient industry. And their uses were staggeringly diverse. They held together the soles of a legionary's heavy sandals, the caligae, that marched across continents. They fastened the planks of the mighty triremes that ruled the Mediterranean. And in a grim historical link that chills the blood, they were the same iron spikes used in the Roman practice of crucifixion. The nail, an object of pure construction, could also become an instrument of ultimate punishment, its function twisted by the hand that wielded it. This duality is a stark reminder that the tools which build can also be used to destroy, a shadow cast by the very technology that raised cities from the ground. Yet more often, the nail was a quiet preserver of history. In waterlogged places like peat bogs or ancient shipwrecks resting on the seafloor, a remarkable chemical conversation takes place. The iron from a corroding nail interacts with the tannins in the surrounding wood. This reaction forms stable iron tannate complexes, essentially petrifying the wood around the nail and protecting it from the bacteria and fungi that would normally cause it to rot away. In many archaeological finds, the only reason we have a 2,000-year-old ship's plank or a medieval roof beam is because of the rusting nails that once held it together. The very object that seems to be decaying is in fact creating a protective shell, sacrificing itself to save the structure it was meant to serve. It is a beautiful, unintended act of preservation where corrosion becomes a kind of memory. The demand for this essential fastener was so immense that it spawned one of the ancient world's first true mass production industries. Nail making was a specialized trade, and a single large construction project like a fortress or a fleet of ships could require hundreds of thousands of nails. This turned blacksmiths into crucial economic players, and the shapes and styles of nails evolved over time. For archaeologists, this is a gift. The specific profile of a nail's head, its shank thickness, and its length can act as a precise chronological marker. Finding a particular type of nail in a layer of soil can help date a Viking settlement, a Roman villa, or a colonial American house with surprising accuracy. The humble nail becomes a tiny metal clock telling time through the evolution of its form. So when you look at a modern, machine-made nail, see beyond its simplicity. You are looking at the direct descendant of the spike that held a Viking longship together against the North Sea's fury, that framed the timber halls of medieval Europe, and that secured the joints of furniture in homes across the ancient world. It enabled construction on a monumental scale, allowing for stronger ships to explore further, sturdier buildings to house growing populations, and more complex tools to shape daily life. The story of the nail is not one of glory or artistry, but of sheer, uncompromising structural necessity. It is the story of holding things fast, of creating a world stable enough to build upon, one driven point at a time. And there you have it, 35 ancient stories, each one hidden in plain sight within the objects you touch every single day. From the propaganda in your pocket coin to the cosmic metaphor in a simple spindle whorl, these items are so much more than tools or trinkets. They are fragments of epic tales, markers of human ingenuity, and quiet bridges to our collective past. Every click of a lock, every turn of a key, every sip from a glass is a ritual with roots stretching back millennia. You are surrounded by a museum you never knew existed, a collection of artifacts that tell the story of who we are, how we survived, and what we dreamed of becoming. The next time you fasten a button, hear a bell, or even pick up a toothpick, pause for just a second. Remember, you are not just completing a task, you are holding a piece of history, participating in a chain of human experience that connects you directly to a Roman soldier, a Viking craftswoman, or an Egyptian priest. Which of these hidden stories surprised you the most? Was it the spiritual key, the nanotechnology in ancient glass, or the dice that once decided fates? Let us know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the secrets of the mundane, be sure to subscribe. There are countless more historical mysteries waiting to be uncovered, hiding in the everyday world all around you. Thanks for watching.